Hey, folks, welcome back to another Leader Talk powered by Veterans Lending Group. I'm SEAC retired John Wayne Troxell, and here at Leader Talk, we look to bring in influential figures from the military and from our nation and talk about the art of leadership, but also talk about life. And today I have a very special guest and a very close friend that I'm bringing on today. This man is a retired command sergeant major. He's a native of Brooklyn, New York. He initially entered the Army as a reservist and a parachute rigger in 1986, but later he entered active duty as an infantryman, and he served his country for 32 years. He's held every leadership position, including team leader, all the way up to command sergeant major at the nominative level. He's recognized around the world as America's drill sergeant, having led the Army's only drill sergeant academy and having his voice premiered on the Gatorade HARD WORK military cadence commercial. Later, he was hand selected by Army senior leadership, and he served as the senior enlisted leader to the commander of the world's largest training post and what was known then as the Basic Combat Training Center of Excellence, Fort Jackson, South Carolina. In his post-military life, he does a lot of things. He's had to overcome some personal family tragedies, but he is doing a lot of things. But most importantly, he is the director of the Warrior PATHH organization, which is a post-traumatic growth program at the Big Red Barn Retreat in Blythewood, South Carolina. So please welcome Command Sergeant Major retired Lamont Christian, better known as Chris. Chris, great to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing great. Boom. How we doing today?
Boom is right, man.
Yeah.
Man, you got the homey look going there behind you. Like there's got to be a fireplace somewhere in there. That in I see the comfy chairs and everything. That's kind of what retirement life is all about, ain't it? Just being comfortable and relaxing and everything.
It most certainly is. I know when I retired, a lot of people was asking where I was going to work and what was next, and I'll tell them I'm retired, not rehired, right? So yeah, I'm definitely enjoying the retired life.
Yeah. Hey, so let's get into this. You joined the Army initially as a reservist to be a parachute rigger.
Yeah.
Um, so what was
So
that all about? You know?
it was kind of ironic just because my dad was 82nd Airborne paratrooper, and I used to be at home sometimes and hear those C-130s flying overhead, and of course I'm in school and hoping that I could look up in the stands and see my dad at a football game or a wrestling match or something, and he wasn't there because he was probably on one of those airplanes. And so what I'll tell you is I had no desire whatsoever to join the military coming out of high school. I mean, I relocated from New York. My dad snatched me up and brings me to this place in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I'm going to high school down there. And like the last thing I wanted to do was join the military. But I go off to college, right? And things was a little different. GI Bills weren't transferred. You had to get your little scholarship, and some of those scholarships would only cover one semester, and then you had to work for another one. And so about halfway through college, I was like, wait a minute, this ain't working. This is my first semester, and I'm already struggling trying to put some money together. So I went to join the reserves, and that's like the only way I could join the reserves is I got to jump out of airplanes. And of course, the recruiter was smiling. He's like, I got the job for you. So he throws me in the reserves. I go to a rigger unit, and the convenience of it was back at Fort Bragg, right? It was a rigger unit there that was doing heavy drop back there behind Bunker Hill. And it was like, hey, that was where everything kind of began to culminate for me. And I started to realize that this military thing was actually a good thing, right? There was a brotherhood there. There was camaraderie. And then I started to see all of the things, just being a reservist, like 1 week in a month, I was seeing the very things that I was able to see that my dad was able to achieve when guys would come over. And these were different guys. Like they didn't look like me. They didn't look like, people that might have grown up with. They were from all walks of life. And all of these guys had the common thing of taking care of each other. And I saw that, and I wanted more of that. And so, yeah, I made a decision later on. I wanted to do active duty. And about 3 years later, when the reserves was finally like, all right, we're tired of you bothering us. We're going to put in the paperwork. You can go on active duty. I went on active duty, had to do basic all over again, went down there to Fort Benning, Georgia, and became an infantryman, and the rest is history.
Yeah, that's interesting. And like your dad, you followed in his footsteps into the 82nd Airborne Division, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. We actually even had an opportunity for about 6 months to serve together in the same battalion, right? I was down in one company, he was in another one. It was very short lived. He had gotten promoted and had moved on and went to like the IG office about a year before he retired. But yeah, we got to jump together a second time. So the first time, he was actually a black hat at Benning, and I went through jump school. He was one of my instructors in the tower and then later in jump branch. And then of course, the beauty, the next time we got to do our German foreign exchange jump wings exchange program, we got to do that together. And the beauty there was now I was a jump master, and I got to JMPI him, and it was just beautiful to have that full circle before he retired. Yep.
That's awesome. That is awesome. Hey, now, you know, as you went through your military career, you served as a leader at every level. And, but you became known, and when I first met you, you were the command sergeant major of the drill sergeant academy, and you were the epitome, in my opinion, of what a drill sergeant should be. Even though now you were a command sergeant major, and then you went on after that to be, if correct me if I'm wrong, the first ever Basic Combat Training Center of Excellence Command Sergeant Major at Fort Jackson. Prior to us changing the name, if I
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. The technicality of that position I was in. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, how did it came full circle for you? You came up, you were a drill sergeant, but you were also in operational units. You did some combat time and everything, but now you're back at, kind of where your roots were, at the drill sergeant academy, and then further on to, being the sergeant major of all forces at Fort Jackson. What was that like, coming back to kind of where you grew up?
It was really unique because to start out with, being an infantryman, I didn't think I would be at Fort Jackson, right? Like that, went through there as a reservist and never thought I would go back. But then going back to Fort Jackson, I actually kind of locked in everything that I thought that we needed to do for our Army. And that was go from the operational force and then go into that training and development force to take the lessons learned, right, from the battlefield and
Yeah.
be able to apply it without like overwhelming, this new civilian who's getting ready to become a citizen soldier or a soldier, right? But then on top of that, SEAC, what I had to also realize was that the development of those drill sergeants was, if not as important, more important, because they were going to return back to those same operational units that I just left, right? And so, there was a delicate dance that I realized that I needed to be able to do. And the Army afforded me that opportunity to where I would go back and forth between these different types of units. And so I could take my lessons from the training world and take it to the operational force and then vice versa. And so I was blessed and fortunate enough to be able to do that at the back end to where the culminating assignment, we were able to actually change the way that we were conducting basic combat training, right? And take it towards the future to where we could give our soldiers an opportunity to really feel like they're part of something, because we were operating as like tribes. If you're not airborne, you're not this. If you're not CAV, you're not that. And so the unique model that I was able to observe from afar was the Marine model, right? And our brothers and sisters over in the Corps as a land force do a lot of things that we do well, or they do things well that we can't do, and vice versa. We do things that they'll never be able to do. But one thing that I was able to take away from that was their creation of that spirit of oneness,
Yeah.
right? Like everyone is a Marine. And so I wanted to be able to kind of look at how we could create that same concept of everyone is a soldier. And so the experience that I have at SEAL or Benning or Jackson, at the end, that culminating event, that forge at the end that we all come out of together, it should feel somewhat similar, if not close to it as possible. And so that was what I was really working towards, to create that shift to where our Army, they could be proud to call themselves a soldier when they started to go to their first assignments.
Yeah, that's awesome. I got to put you on the spot here. So,
Uh-oh.
you know, um, you know, Gatorade was looking to do a motivational commercial on athletes that would kind of have a military flair to it, and they got the perfect voice to do the cadence calling for the video. And I want to show the audience the video right quick, and then Chris, I'd like to discuss it a little bit. So Haley, if we could run the Gatorade Hard Work video, Here is Sergeant Major Lamont Christian doing his best by calling cadence.
Hard work, work. There you go. Hard work, work. Everybody doing it right. Hard work, work, work. That's what you say. Hard work, work, work. I'm okay. Hard work, work. Hard work, do it every day. Hard work, work. Get up on the street. Hard work, work. Go and earn my pay. Hard work, work. Boots on and lay some mud. Hard work, work. Hey, work. Hard work, work. Hard work. That's what you say. Hard work, hard work. I earn my pay. Hard work, work. Everybody doing it right. Hard work, hard work. Do it every day. Hard work, work. Get up on the street. Hard work, work. Hard work, work. That's what you say. Hard work, work.
Now that was now I won't be able to get that cadence out of my mind the rest of the night.
Right,
now, you know,
right.
when you hear that one song and you got to, that is awesome. You got to tell me, what was that like? How did this thing come about? And then, you know, obviously you are, you know, America's drill sergeant, you know, and for the 15 years that I've known you, you know, you've been that guy. How did this come about? And then how did this thing take off?
Yeah, so it was crazy. I was a drill sergeant leader down at Fort Benning. This was like in, I don't know, I'm not going to date myself. It was 90 something, right? And but basically they called up the historical, you know, collection people called up and said, hey, we want to record history. And one of those ways is through cadence calling, right? We understand the history behind it and we want to capture that. Well, this company was the same company that had recorded the earlier versions of Run with the Army Rangers, Run with the Army Airborne. Now you got to go back in time a little bit because they were doing cassettes back then.
Yeah.
And so they fast forwarded, and around that time period, they wanted to upgrade their media. And so it's like, all right, we got to put this on CDs and MP3, blah, blah, blah. Well, they tasked about 5 drill sergeants from the schoolhouse to go out and say, hey, we want you to go run and sing some cadences for some people that are going to record you. So these people showed up with the old school, you know, boom mic and with the mouse looking squirrel microphone and had the headphones on and a box on the chest. And they literally sat in the middle of the parking lot back there on Sand Hills, right?
Yeah.
At Fort Benning, and the PX back there, because that was where the drill sergeant school had moved when it was on Sand Hills when I was there. And we ran in circles around the parking lot singing cadences. Right. And so there was about 4 of us, you know, that had been really good at it and singing cadences. You know, of course, like you said, I cut my teeth in the 82nd. You know, if you're running down Ardennes and you're going to get out there, you're going to sing some cadences. And if you're not, you're going to get knocked upside the head and told to move to the back. Right. So I grew up on that. And so I was one of those guys that could sing some decent cadences. And so I get out there and I sang about 5 cadences straight. And it was a good 20, 30 minutes of me just singing cadence. And so my go-to, my closeout cadence, even when General Turner was the brigade commander out there at Fort Benning, he would always come out and say, Chris, I'm going to run with you on the last 2 miles when we do our little 5-mile run. And I'm going to run with you on the last 2. So I always had this cadence that I would bring up, and it was this hard work cadence. Now, what was crazy is the hard work cadence, like my drill sergeant, did it when I was a private, and he was airborne and ranger and all of this. And so I remembered the tune, but the lyrics, right? Those lyrics were my lyrics. And what's crazy is they recorded it and it got put on the shelf. Never heard from them, never heard about it. Fast forward a couple of years later, I'm in Afghanistan, and my son sends me a clip. He says, hey, Dad, who is this? And I played the audio clip, and it's this cadence. And I was like, man, this sounds like me. And when that part in the beginning where it says, there you go, right? It's like they finally get it and they're in sequence and everything. My grandfather used to say that to me when I would do something and was successful at it. He's like, there you go. And so I remembered that. And so when I said that, it was like, there you go. I was like, oh, shit, that's me. And so, you know, it was pretty exciting. It was really cool. I mean, it was out there on the internet for everybody. And it really didn't have much connection to it at that time. Well, fast forward a little bit further, about 2014, I'm getting ready to be reassigned to Fort Jackson to become the commandant for the Drill Sergeant Academy. That's also the year that we were celebrating our 50th anniversary of the Drill Sergeant program.
Yeah.
So it was ironic that this thing was getting ready to rear its head about the same time in May that I show up to be the commandant for the only Army Drill Sergeant Academy. Well, this is where it gets interesting. At that same time, that's when Gatorade took this commercial off the shelf. They had already done it like in 2006 or 7. They took it off the shelf and booted it back up because that was around the time that one of the Sheen brothers was into the winning, and he was going around saying winning. So winning was the new phrase, right? And so they brought this thing off. It happened to be during that year of the 50th. So we made all of the connectivity to it and everything. But it was during that time period that when we realized it was Gatorade, I shared that information with my sister, who also served our country for 20 years. And so she was like, wait a minute, I'm going to do some research. So she did. She reached out to Pepsi. We found out that Gatorade was a subsidiary of Pepsi Cola. And she wrote them and said, hey, I just want you to know that's my brother's voice on there. And they was like, okay, great. Here's a box with some Gatorade, a nice towel, and a letter saying thank you. So I was like, okay. It all worked out. It all worked out. But that cadence is, I would say, it will forever stay around as long as time is here, right? And what I'm trying to say is that hard work, right? That's a phrase that won't change with time, right? When we say hard work, whether you're talking about, when this country began, right? And we were trying to forge this new way of looking at life and understanding what freedom is, to where we're talking about in the future where, we don't even know what's coming. It's going to take hard work for us to continue to do well and be well. And so that's just a phrase that will always continue as long as time is around, right?
I love it, man. I love it. Hey, so let's talk a little leadership here. You have served both active and reserve, but from where the rubber meets the road all the way up to a nominative level command sergeant major. What would you say are some key leadership traits or attributes that you focused on that made you successful as a leader in terms of building teams and building you as a leader that allowed you to keep moving up so successfully?
I love the fact that you said successful, SEAC, because there was so many times I would have young service members come up to me and says, how do I get promoted? Right. Yeah. And that always punched me in my stomach because it's like, man, you're missing the mark if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
But if they said, how do I be successful? It was like, I was just so happy with joy, because then that meant that they understood the assignment, right? That they understood that success was dependent upon how well they were able to lead, right? And that the advancements and the promotions would come with that. And so I had this rule of threes that I always would talk about. And so some of the people that's listening tonight and watching tonight, they already know where I'm going with this. And that is, I would say that leaders should practice CPR daily. And when I talk about practicing CPR daily, immediately it conjures up a thought of somebody doing chest compressions and breathing, right? I will tell you, if you practice CPR daily, not only will your organization survive, but your career will survive, right? Success comes by being, one, consistent, right? As a leader, if you're not consistent, right, your formation will pick up on that. And they're trying to figure out who's coming in today. Is it Dr. Jekyll or is it Mr. Hyde, right? So you got to be consistent. And what it does is it provides that predictability, and not to the point where it's like, well, I already know what he's going to say, predictability, but predictability and understanding that you're going to be fair and equitable in your decision making, that you're going to be, hard but fair, that you'll be focused. Like all of those things will be consistent simply because they know that as being a member of your organization, that you're not going to just change up on the way that the wind might be blowing, or you're not going to follow the flow of somebody else. You're going to be a consistent leader. That's first and foremost. The second thing I say, you have to be professional. Now, when we take that word professional, we can dice that thing up so many different ways on what it means. But at the end of the day, what it absolutely means, at least to me, is that a person can recognize that they are being treated the way that they would want to be treated or the way that they would want to treat somebody else. And so you can say, well, how does that look? The way that I would often talk about being professional was, if you looked at an airline pilot or a dentist or a doctor or somebody that you put your life or your family's life in their hands, if they were acting unprofessional, would you get off that airplane? Well, most definitely. Okay, so you know what that is. And I don't even have to say what unprofessional is, but in your mind, you would get off the aircraft.
Yeah.
If the doctor was talking to you unprofessionally and they were supposed to cut on you 2 hours from now, you're hopping up from that gurney. You're not going to let them cut on you, right? So it's kind of the same concept. I can define what professional is in thousands of different ways, but you and I both know what that is at the end of the day. And so my ask and what I would share with that individual is to be professional. You know what that is, and how you treat people with dignity and respect, on how you are fair and equitable in your decision making, right? Yeah. And your formation will pick up on that. They know what that means. If you're sitting there and I got it. Sometimes we got to drop that F-bomb and say, hey, to emphasize, this is what I fucking want, right? And I get it. You now have my attention. But if that's your only way of communicating with me, and that, like, after a while, I'm just going to sit there and count all of the lack of professional terms and words that you're using, and I'm going to miss your message.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And last but not least, I would say is being relevant, right? In this age of technology, right, there's no excuse for not being able to have the most up-to-date information, the most current information. Because if you stand in front of your formation at any given time, right, and you say something that's out of pocket, if you say something that's not within the regulatory, changes, and because it's changing, this doctrine is changing on a regular basis. And if you're not up to date, I guarantee you that soldier, that sailor, that airman, that Marine, that Coast Guard, that Guardian is going to whip that device out, and they're going to Google it. They're going to do that quick search, and they're going to bring it over. And it's like, hey, actually, this is the new regulation. And you just lost credibility. Right? Yeah. You just stepped in a landmine that you ain't gonna be able to recover from, because from that point forward, everything that you say, I'm gonna check it. I gotta fact check it because you came up short. And so, being relevant also ties into being humble there, right? Because it's like, hey, I made a mistake. You know what? You're right. I misquoted, wrong regulation. But that's by staying relevant, because I can come back to you and tell you, I put this out yesterday, I was incorrect. It is actually this. And I just want everybody to be on the right sheet of music. But yeah, that's what I'll tell you, SEAC. You got to be consistent. You got to be professional, and you got to be relevant. You do those things, your formation will follow you to wherever you need to go and back, because they will trust you. And that connection is there. That trust and connection will be built and interwoven in between practicing CPR daily. That's it in a wrap, man.
I love it. CPR daily. Folks, can be consistent, be professional, and be relevant. So we're going to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back. I'm going to really ask Chris to talk about, he's had some tragedy in his life that has caused him to get on the path for his post-military life. We're going to talk about that. But first, here's a quick message from our sponsor, Veterans Lending Group, the #1 VA home loan specialist.
At Veterans Lending Group, we're not just VA home loan specialists. We are educators, community leaders, military service members, or family of those who serve. We are committed to serving, supporting, and educating our military families. 60% of our staff are prior service or spouses, and 85% of the loans we close are VA loans. We are your special ops of VA lending. We will not restrict your VA home loan benefit like many other lenders do. We believe that you have earned this benefit through your service, and we are here to protect your right to use it the way the VA wrote the guidelines. Our team can lend in all 50 states. We are here to assist you with your next home purchase or refinance, whether you are PCSing, transitioning, or retiring. Our team of specialists are here to support your family. Visit our website today to connect with a VA specialist. www.veteranslendinggroup.com.
Awesome. And we are back with Leader Talk, powered by Veterans Lending Group. My guest today is Command Sergeant Major retired Lamont Christian. Chris, a good friend of mine, a true professional. Now, Chris, we want to talk a little bit about your family, and if you could talk a little bit about your daughter and what you've had to go through.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about that. And what I'll share with you is, as leaders, we are charged, right, with taking care of our formations on a daily basis and helping them, deal with the stress and the rigors of life. And we're not just even talking about combat; we're just talking about life in general.
Hmm.
And our number one thing is taking care of that formation, and so we don't take care of ourselves. And a lot of times, our service is at the detriment of our families. And so, yeah, I had 4 children, and they served with me, right? I'll just call it what it is. They traveled with me to my different duty stations. Other than Hawaii, I think that was the one that they enjoyed the most because they spent the longest there with the multiple deployments out of the 25th. But they enjoyed Hawaii, and they continued to grow, but together, right, as a family, as a unit. And unfortunately, after serving our country, serving for 32 years, in October of 2018, I hung up the uniform. And in November of 2018, one of my 4 children, Alexandra, took her life. She committed suicide at a moment that I was looking at enjoying the rest of my life with my family. And I lost her to this thing called suicide. And what I'll tell you is I struggled, John. I did. And my
Yeah.
struggle wasn't necessarily losing my beautiful daughter, right? I did. I went through the grieving process. I began doing all of those things that as leaders we tell people in our formation when they lose a loved one or when we lose one of our battle buddies or we lose someone close to us. I was doing those things. But where my struggle came in was I was unable to help my family, right? Um, as a parent, losing a child, I did. I suffered that. But I don't know what it means to carry a beautiful daughter and lose that daughter. And so her mother struggled, and I didn't know how to help her. She did 21 years of service herself. So we both were in the military, away from our children a lot of times, and multiple deployments where we went together at the same time, even. And so our children were on their own. But my oldest daughter, Sharice, was the one who was the surrogate mom, right? She was the one looking out for them, making sure that they got their stuff to take off for school because we were both at PT, right? She was the
Hmm.
one making sure that they at least laid out their homework and everything in the evening for us to inspect it when we got home. Eventually, but she was kind of filling in as the mom. So she was dealing with the loss of her sister. And then my son, the only son, in my absence, he's supposed to be what? The man of the house, right? The big brother, taking care of everything. And so he was struggling with understanding why Alexandra left us. And then ultimately, Alexandra was a twin.
Hmm.
Alexis, her sister, was side by side with her, not only in birth, but all the way through for 22 years of their life. They lived together. And so she struggled with this. And that was when my struggle was helping them to get through this process. And so I began to create isolation, man. I didn't want to participate in events. I would go because, I'm Chris, right? So America's drill sergeant, we want you to come and give this speech. We want you to do this training. We want this. And so, grudgingly, I did it, right? But I would go and show up 5 minutes before my name was called. And then I'd look for the bathroom and make my way to it and keep walking. It's like, Chris, what happened? It's like, oh, I had to leave early. And that time span got closer and closer and closer together to at one point, I even just showed up as they were calling my name and introducing me. I walked up to the podium, got off, and continued to walk right out the door. Like I just did not want to be around people. And on the outside, that bubble looked the same, man. That bubble looked like Chris was just in the zone. And so I wasn't creating solitude, I was creating isolation. And that struggle for me was something that, looking back now, I know I would have gone into a much darker place, right? Because I wasn't beginning to appreciate life. I didn't see that there was opportunity for deeper relationships. I didn't understand that there was new possibilities or that I could create a spiritual and existential change in myself and redefine my purpose and take my pain and turn it into purpose. And so, yeah, that was where I was at, and where I am now is creating that change in the community, right? That we all serve, what I call defenders, not just military, but our first responders, right? They're on the front lines as well in our communities, just like we're on the front lines on foreign soil. But again, we all raise our hands to serve a cause greater than ourselves during the prime of our lives, man. From like 17 on, the prime of your life, you are giving it up for a cause greater than yourself, right? An idea, not a king, not a queen, a potentate, but an idea. And our families wind up being on the receiving end of some of that struggle. And there's ways that we can help ourselves so that we can continue to be the defenders in our communities and in our country, by starting at home and starting with ourselves.
Yeah. So what would you attribute you as a family, you and your wife and your other three children, what would you attribute that got you beyond the grief to where you are now, where you are giving back so much? What would you, if you could put your finger on it, what would you say?
So it's a journey with an outcome, right? I'm still on this journey, man. It hasn't ended. I'm not in this perfect place. Like, I still have shitty days. Like, I'm not going to BS it, right? I do. My positivity meter will still peg out and I'll still get angry, right?
Yeah.
But I'm in a place now where I can respond instead of reacting. Like, I was trained to be a reaction. Right? It's like battle drills, right? Like react to contact. People's lives are at stake. And so what I'm able to do now is through a series of changes in my own life. Like, one thing is education, right? I'm a lifelong learner. So I'm constantly trying to look at ways to better myself, improve myself. And that may require reading. Like, you pull up, like you had before with your reading list, right? Say, what books are you reading? So if I pull up, Atomic Habits, or I pull up, Tribes by Carl Junger, like there was something, all these different things, or I may pull these books up. I'm diving into that to learn about the human element, life, right? I just finished reading and watching some YouTube videos. That's education. It doesn't always have to be reading, right? I was watching some YouTube videos by a guy named Joseph Campbell, and he talks about this thing called the hero's myth, right? And he dove in and did all of this research about the heroes. And if you look at all the epic stories in our history, there's a hero. And guys like us, when somebody says, "Oh, you're such a hero," it's like, "No, I'm not a hero. Don't call me that." Truthfully, I will tell you, yes, we are heroes, and here's why. A hero is just defined as an ordinary person who has survived an extraordinary experience and can return to his community and his family and share those life's lessons. That's it, right? And that's what a hero. You were an ordinary person and you went through some crazy stuff, and you're able to come back and share those life lessons. That's a hero, right? And so education allows me to be able to understand, it's like, where am I at in my life? The other thing is regulatory practices, right? Like, you get out there, you hit that beaver fit, you hitting the gym, you hitting the road, you pounding away, and so, like, that's your go-to wellness practice, to say, I want to be able to create energy and space and feel good about who I am today. And you got to find that, and you got to find it and do it in moderation, because overindulgence in this also can take you out of whack, right? Like, if you're just running until your heart explodes, or if you're constantly, doing something, self-medication and all that's not always just alcohol and drugs. Like, you can overdo retail therapy and be clicking away in the middle of the night, and all these boxes show up 2 days later, right? So moderation. And that's through regulatory practices, whether it's breathing exercises, whether it's meditation, whether it's, spiritual reading, your scriptures in the morning. Like, you pick it, whatever's going to uplift you when that day begins. You have to create that. That's the operative word, is regulatory, right? So you create that regulation, and that creates that space so that when life throws its blows at you, you got capacity to deal with it. You're not already brimming at the top with the stress and the anxiety. You can release some of that pressure before life throws its blows at you. The next thing was disclosure, right? Like, you asked me about Alexandra. I can freely say that without breaking down emotionally. I can share that with you. But disclosure also comes in a good way. When we hear that word, it sounds negative. But I will tell you, John, if I was to tell you what I'm grateful for today, I'm also grateful for Alexis, because yesterday was hers and Alexandra's birthday. So this is apropos that we're having this conversation. Yesterday was her birthday. And it started out very sad, right? Like, the 17th of August is not a good day for Alexis. But it turned into a good day. And I was able to say to you today, I'm grateful for being able to watch her be in a place that she can raise her daughter, my granddaughter, in a positive manner, and not through sadness, not through depression, and not through anger, and all of those things that come with grief, right? I watched my daughter deal with yesterday in a way that was beautiful, and I'm grateful for that. That's disclosure. I just gave you something positive. It doesn't always have to be this crap that I'm dealing with, right? So that's growth. Because how often do we want to talk about good stuff too, right? Unless I'm showing you my bling or, showing you some other stuff on IG that I got it going on, right?
Yeah.
And then the next thing is the story, right? I have to change my story, my legacy. Like, how are you going to remember me? Like you said, you talk about our experience and how you met me at the Drill Sergeant Academy when I was running Fort Jackson, with the general and everything, and all of that is great. But that's not who I am. My legacy is the bear hug that you and I had that we shared when you came to Columbia, right? The smile and the grip that we had, right? Like that joy and the strength and everything that you demonstrated to me and that I was sharing with you. Like, that's the legacy that you will be remembered by, is how of a person I am. And I get to write that new story. I'm not somebody that's struggling and it's like, well, damn, man, where did Chris go? He just fell off the map of the earth, right? It's like, where's he at? Well, I get to change that story and be positive. And that kind of takes me into that next area, which is service, as giving back. Like these 5 areas that I just described is staying educated, being a lifelong learner, creating some type of regulatory practice where I'm taking care of myself, self first, right? Because I can't take care of nobody else until I take care of me.
Absolutely.
And then making sure that I disclose, right? Being honest with myself first and being honest with other people. I'm not perfect, man. I'm still screwing things up in my life, but I'm trying really hard to stay in that zone to where I don't make the same mistakes. And I can disclose that and tell you and be honest, I'm not perfect. And then I can also turn around and tell you, I'm really holding on to this moment of joy. And then, of course, the next thing is write my own story or my own legacy. And last but not least, find a way to give back. And that's what I'm doing here with the program that I'm the director of, is finding a way that I can give back.
Yeah. So, Chris, let's talk about your program, Warrior PATHH, the post-traumatic growth program, and you're the director of it. Can you talk to the audience about that and what your vision is with the program?
Yeah, so I was blessed and fortunate to have the opportunity to be asked to come here and serve as the director of the Warrior PATHH program, which, really in its infancy, when it began, it was just a thought that was taken on by a guy named Dr. Richard Tedeschi. Like, he's the father of that phrase, post-traumatic growth. And what he wound up doing was he was doing a lot of research, a lot of studies. And what he was trying to figure out was what's at the other end of the spectrum of post-traumatic stress, right? And he started with looking for wisdom. I mean, that was kind of what the research was initially going to be on. Like, where does wisdom come from? But in that, as he started pulling the thread, he came across this thing of post-traumatic stress where it just kept popping up. And he's like, there's got to be something at the other end of that spectrum. We know what all of this list is. My 8-year-old granddaughter can tell you what PTSD is, right? But when we start talking about growth at the other end, it's like, okay, now you got my attention because I have no clue what you're talking about. Well, that's what he did. He started doing the research and he wanted to know, how is it that certain groups of people can thrive, right? They can start living their life where they're thriving. Like, how many people, when you ask them how they doing, they tell you, I'm thriving, SEAC, I'm thriving, right? You don't hear that. I'm living the dream, I'm surviving, I'm coping. We hear all of those things that kind of stay down here in the bottom of our life. Like, nobody talks about thriving, living up here in the top of their life. And so he wanted to figure out, well, how is that happening with two groups of people? One of those groups was the POWs from Vietnam, right? He took a step back and he looked at these guys that had survived the Hanoi Hilton for like 9 years, again, the prime of their life, shot down. They were aviators, right? Like the #1 job to have in the military during the Vietnam War. And these guys were shot down and held in captivity in 8x8 cells. And yet when they came out of captivity, the doctors, the psychiatrists, everybody said that they probably would be balled up like an infant inside of the closet. You're going to probably have to institutionalize them. They're probably not going to do very well and be suicidal. How about 4%? 4% of those guys came back suffering from PTSD. The rest of them thriving. CEOs of companies, presidential candidates, other political pundits where they were running for. So how is that possible? Well, they went through the things that I just talked about, right? Leadership and training was the foundation of those phases of growth that I just talked about, the education, the regulatory practices, right? All of those things. And they realized at the worst time of their life, on the worst day, at the worst moment of their life, when they were shot down, that they needed to look at life from a different perspective and create that change. And that's that's post-traumatic growth in a nutshell. The other group of people that Dr. Tedeschi and Dr. Calhoun, who was with him, studied were, believe it or not, parents who lost their children to diseases such as cancer and even suicide.
Yeah.
Right? So now when you take that step back, now here I am, I'm in that group, right? And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking the same thing. 4 years ago, 5 years ago, had you asked me these questions, I wouldn't have been able to tell you squat about it. I was like, man, I don't freaking know, man. I'm still trying to figure it out. But where I am now is one phrase kind of helps me to stay grounded, right? Where I'm at. And that's, it's not what's wrong, it's what happened. Right. And when our warriors, right, and that's what the program was based on, warriors and our defenders can understand that it's not what's wrong. It's just what happened.
Yeah.
It gives you an opportunity to look at it a little bit differently and say, I don't own this, right? Like I can't get rid of that memory. Nobody's going to try to take it from you. It's yours. It cannot be taken or erased. But what I ask is my brothers and sisters is to take that pain and turn it into purpose. Right? Don't take that pain and use it as a way to pull yourself down, because man, you obviously you was a good person. You wouldn't have advanced, you wouldn't have been successful, you wouldn't have done these things. And so looking back, you say, okay, I want to be that version of myself. Man, I'm not going to jump out of planes the way that I did as a young paratrooper and run around in the woods and do all of those things. I might try in my mind, but I'm physically not capable of doing that. And so I have to understand that that's a version of me that was great, but there's an even better version going forward. My kids joke with me because I screw up quotes, right? I create Chrisisms. And the Chrisism that I have right now is that we live two lives. And people's like, no, Chris, we only live one life. No, we live two. You live that first life all the way up until that moment when you realize you only have one life. And that's when you start living. And the problem is a lot of times that second life, we start thinking about it and it's like, damn, is it too late? Is it too late? It's never too late, right? You realize you only have one life to live and you got to make the most of it. And it starts with you, right? It starts with you. And so often leaders, we're quick to tell others and fix stuff. And like even now, like I know I'm going on and talking, but I have found a way to listen, to learn by learning to listen. And that's the challenge. As leaders, we want to fix stuff, and we don't always have to fix it. Sometimes we just need to be listened to.
Yeah.
That's
so
it.
how can people find out about the Warrior Path program?
So Warrior Path, if they was to Google it and pull it up, whether it's the Boulder Crest Foundation or Warrior Path, right? And there's paths and there's other things out there, but understand it's progressive and alternative training for helping heroes. And it's out of Boulder Crest Foundation, which is in Blythewood, Virginia.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you'll be able to go in there and you Google that. And if they want to sign up for it, they want to get information, there's probably a location that might be nearby them. There's 9 locations throughout the country that they would be able to go and participate in some of the other programs that might exist. So even if they're not ready for Warrior Path, right? Because it's intense, man. It's 7 days that you actually pick up your stuff and you move out sharply and you go to one of these locations and you are embedded there for 7 days of intense training, right? And I call it training because that's what it is, man. There's no doctors and therapists on the team. It's all like-minded, people who have shared experiences, been to combat or served our country or served in our defender community as first responders. And heck, even last responders, right? Responders, the coroners, right? Like even them, 911 dispatchers, right? All of these people are involved in the front lines of taking care of other people and don't take care of themselves. So yeah, Warrior Path, and when they pull that up, it'll be under the Boulder Crest Foundation.
Awesome. Wow. Well, Chris, unfortunately, we're out of time, brother, but I can stay here all night and talk with you, man. So, hey, I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. One, for being the epitome of what a military leader should be, and now how you're giving back in post-military life, but how you dealt with personal family tragedy, and you've turned this into a positive that you're giving back. And you will always be America's drill sergeant, and more importantly, you'll always be a good friend of mine. So, Chris, thanks so much for being on the show tonight, man. And I look forward to staying in touch with you.
Definitely, John. I appreciate you, and I look forward to another touchdown.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching Leader Talk with my guest, Command Sergeant Major retired Lamont Christian. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time for Leader Talk powered by Veterans Lending Group. Can I get a boom?
Boom.
Boom.